we have levers.
Right. So there you are. Well, that's fine. If the dog joins us, hooray. Love it. All right, Patrick.
All right,
you ready to
yeah.
go?
Yep, we are live. Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we have our good friend, longtime friend, Charles Todd here with us. Going to be talking about the brand new Ian Rutledge novel, A Game of Fear. And
that's a signed copy too.
that is a signed copy. Yes.
It is. And for the first time in a long time, signed by Charles, but not by Caroline, who together, Charles and his mother, actually it's David, but we'll call him Charles. Charles and his mother wrote these wonderful books together, the Ian Rutledge series and the Best series.
Crawford.
Yeah, Best Crawford series. But as I understand it, A Game of Fear, Caroline and you completed it before she died. And is there one more Rutledge out there still that you two wrote together?
No, we turned in that manuscript in February of last year, and we turned in a Bess in July of last year. And so I worked on the final edits and production for Game of Fear, and I'm working right now to try and get the next Bess Crawford out, hopefully this year.
Well, that would be nice. I know the last time that I spoke to Caroline when I could see her was last July when we talked about An Irish Hostage, which was a really wonderful book. And so you were at that point finishing up. What's the next Bess Crawford called?
Right now it's called Bess 13.
An inspired title. So
absolutely.
well,
We're working on the title.
Well, this is a melancholy occasion in some respects because it's the first one that Charles and I have done without his mom. And so we've assembled a few photos. I unfortunately lost my phone some years ago because I had lots of pictures of Caroline. One of my very favorite evenings with Caroline, she was here in 2014 when Dale Chihuly had his first glass exhibition at the Desert Botanical Gardens. And I took Caroline, and because the event at the store was at 7, we went at 5, and it was still light. But as we were there and walking our way through, and she was enraptured, gradually the sunset began. And like at 10 to 7, I said to her, and she said to me, I really want to see this all the way through. And I said, okay. So I called the store and I said, ask them to wait. We'll make it there after a while. But Caroline really wants to see all the Chihuly. And, it was really nice because all the fans sat there patiently until I guess we got there about 7:30. But, looking back, Charles, I'm really glad that we did a few of those things, that we indulged in that. Life is too short.
She thoroughly enjoyed that and going to your house and Rob's cooking. And it was something that she really and truly enjoyed. She liked spending time with you.
Well, we like spending time with her. I'm sorry she wasn't able to meet our new puppies. But also Caroline was a frequent guest and honoree at Malice Domestic. And I do have, but Patrick, I'm not sure you're showing it. I do have a photo I took of her at Malice, and I think that was at 2016. Did you two sit at the table? I know Laurie King and Margaret Marin and I and Rob. And I thought that you and Caroline and Reese were the rest of the table. Do I have that right?
Sounds about right.
I think it was, and it turned out to be great because everybody at the table won some kind of an Agatha Works. Well, actually, Rob and I were being honored for being old. That's what we were guests of honor, but that actually just means that you've been around a long time, and so they want to say something nice to you. But it was an especially memorable Malice Domestic. So anyway, Patrick, you have a few photos of Caroline. Maybe that will kind of place it in context so people can see what a bright spirit she was.
All right.
That's a wonderful photo of Caroline. I always loved her gorgeous gray hair, the way it kind of swept up there, and she had the neatest smile. That's at Malice Domestic. That's that very thing I was mentioning to you.
Sorry about that. Get back to where I was.
And there, Charles and Caroline together. Oh, that's a
Good.
really nice picture. Is this
Yes.
when she was at home in Delaware?
No, that was taken in England, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I
That's a
love that
wonderful
look
photo.
in her face there.
Now, there you are at the Poison Pen, because I
Yes.
recognize our back room. And there's your mom. That might have been our entrance after the
That's
Chihuly.
at the Wilford Owens statue in Memorial Park in Shropshire.
Sorry,
Ah,
this thing kind of has a mind of its own.
it does.
slideshow.
See if you can slow it down a bit.
Wish I-
There, that's a really nice photo.
Yeah, let's see here. Let me see what else I might have.
Don't you have any from your phone, Patrick?
I looked, and I didn't go back far enough, perhaps. I know I've got something. Let's see. Yeah, that's such a great photo.
It really is. Where did you say this was from, Charles?
That was taken in England. We were sitting outside having some tea. It was
Yeah.
a lovely day, and
Yeah.
she was having a great time as usual. You know, you could always tell she'd get that sparkle in her eye, and you knew she was having a lot of fun.
She loved traveling to England with you. In fact, one of the wonderful things about your writing career together was the research trips that you took to England and the inspiration that you got from them. Now, is this you? Because you live in Florida
Yes.
now.
Yes, she came down to visit, and Deanna and I took her to the Seminole Inn in Indiantown, Florida, which the owner's daughter was friends with Wallace Simpson. And the Edward VIII, or the Duke of Windsor at that time, and Wallace Simpson used to come and stay at that inn. And they still have all the memorabilia and the special room that they stayed in and all that. And so we went down. They have a lovely Sunday brunch there. And they have a parrot in there that loves to talk. And Caroline thoroughly enjoyed herself. You know how much she loved birds.
She did, absolutely. But you know, I love this picture. This is Caroline looking kind of flirtatious, but wonderful color too.
But you know, it was funny. Even in a crowded room with hundreds of people, she could shoot me that mom look across the room. And I tell you what, I don't care how many people were in the room or how far away she was, you could feel it.
I can imagine. Now she was very small, but a real presence. And there you are. Let's see, which one is that? That is
Duty to the Dead.
no, it's actually a Divided Loyalty.
I'm sorry, a Divided Loyalty. Duty to the Dead was the best. I'm sorry.
That's
But
okay.
yeah,
No problem at
that
all.
was the Standing Stones at Avesbury.
Right.
We always look forward to coming to Poison Pen.
Oh, that was
I'm
her
still
last.
trying to get you to take that picture of me with the beard down.
And what is this statue that you're standing by?
That was Wilford Owens, who was a famous poet and World War I vet that is erected in the Memorial Gardens in Shropshire.
Very nice. I was looking at the previous photo was her last visit to the store, because I did look up the date, and it was in February of 2020, which is right before we all shut everything down.
Right.
So I'm really grateful that she was able to come and visit us before COVID, wiped us all out in terms of live events.
Yep.
And then we carried on.
The one blessing, if there would be, Mom was sharp as a tack and alert all the way through. She never lost any of her faculties or any of that wonderful mind that she had. And that is a blessing.
Well, and she did die very quickly. She didn't have, months of prolonged suffering and the kinds
No.
of things that can happen to people. So, it was a real shock. I mean, we were together in July, and then, before the end of summer, she was gone. And I thought, Charles, there were so many glitches in the two of you being honored at BoucherCon, and you were going to be again.
Yes.
It was all set up for the New Orleans BoucherCon, which was roughly about the 1st of September or something
Yes.
in 2021. And it was
Fortunately,
canceled.
it was canceled before the hurricane hit,
Yeah,
because that hurricane hit New Orleans right when BoucherCon was scheduled to be there.
right. No, I know the convention.
Caroline was really looking forward to going, and she enjoyed New Orleans and was really looking forward to making that trip.
Well, I'm sorry that I know there were a lot of disappointed people when it didn't work out, but you two have had lots of honors, all the way back to an original nomination in 1996 when A Test of Wills was published, came out. And I remember the controversy because it was nominated for Best First Mystery, but then it turned out your mom had written some romance. And so,
It was still a best
disputed.
first mystery. It was not a best first book.
Right.
It was a best first mystery, and it was the first mystery that either of us had ever written.
Yes, no, I recall it well. And didn't it go on to win something in the UK? Didn't it win one of the UK daggers?
It was nominated for the Dagger in England, but no. We were nominated for the Edgar, the Anthony, and the Dagger. But no, we actually never won any of them.
Well, but you were frequently nominated, and
Yes.
yep. So obviously your books had a very devoted following, great reviews. In fact, the reviews for this new book are really wonderful. I looked up some of them before we started, and I was really interested to see. It's called Exceptional by Publishers Weekly, and which ends with saying Rutledge remains one of today's most fully rounded mystery leads. And I do think that you created a marvelous character in Rutledge, and you found a way to give him wounds of World War II service, PTSD, in the form of a voice that speaks to him and feels alive. And, I think Hamish is almost as interesting a character as Rutledge. Did you and your mom did you decide upon Hamish together?
Rutledge came up with Hamish, actually. It's one of the things that Caroline and I have always stressed was listening to your characters. And Hamish came from Rutledge as we were developing that character in A Test of Wills.
Well, I think, PTSD has been portrayed in thrillers and regular fiction, crime fiction, whatever, so often, but I think Hamish is a unique manifestation of it.
Well, Rutledge is told in third person, and yet we needed some way for him to describe what he was thinking. And because of World War I and the terrible casualties as a result, nowadays or in later years, you would have the inspector go out with his sergeant. And in that time period, there just wasn't the manpower for a two-man team to go out. So there was no real way to describe what Rutledge was thinking and feeling as he was investigating the case. And through Hamish's character, we were able to bring out not only Rutledge's suffering and his difficulties adjusting to being back at the yard and resuming his career, but also certain aspects of the case. And so Hamish really came alive, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure people wouldn't misconstrue Hamish as a specter or a ghost or someone that saw things that Rutledge didn't. And primarily, we never intended for Hamish to be a gimmick nor PTSD. We felt that shell shock was such an important part of that time period that it had to be portrayed properly and not just be used as something to sell books.
Well, I mean, it isn't just shell shock. A lot of it is guilt too. Even though Rutledge didn't have a lot of choice in the rigid army, the way they approached somebody who refused an order directly, there wasn't a whole lot he could do.
It's interesting though, you find that a lot of the survivor's guilt.
Right.
Of here, this person or that person, why them and not me? And I was talking with somebody who was out at the USS Arizona, and they still have funeral and memorial services for the servicemen who lived through Pearl Harbor and still wanted to, in their death, to return to be with their crewmates. And that says it better than anything we could have said.
Well, the truth is World War II was so much senseless warfare, and Hamish's refusal to risk the man one more time by going over, coming out of the trench, whatever it was that was going on, to
well, he said to Rutledge,
yeah,
I'll go over the top. I'm just tired of leading young men to their slaughter.
right.
And World War I was definitely like that.
It was. It's just, I was in New Zealand on the 100th anniversary of Anzac, and I don't think that I fully understood just how terrible that war was in, all around the world, that people died so senselessly. It should have been called off before it started or shortly after it started. It was just one of those things that got mired down. But in terms of Rutledge, let's talk about other costs to him. He was engaged, and when he returned, and he wasn't in wonderful shape. The woman he was engaged to basically brushed him off, right? Married a diplomat,
Yes.
Immigrated to Canada. So Rutledge, his sister is still alive, which is a wonderful thing. But Rutledge's thought that he would, marry and start a family has been interrupted. But you've gradually introduced the sister of the faithless fiance, and she has a role in this book. And I think I remember in this book, Rutledge worries that, or not worries, but he regrets that he didn't see the character of the two sisters more clearly, and that he chose the wrong one. And I don't know if your plan was to move him closer to Kate. Isn't that her name?
Yes.
To move her closer to Kate. I mean, it seems cruel. This is his 24th investigation that we are reading, but it's only 1921. So,
Yes.
One of the great things about writing historical fiction is you don't have to write it in real time. So Rutledge can finish a case, and then 2 days later he could be off, on another case and another book. But I didn't know if you intended him to be alone forever, or whether over the long haul, he might eventually end up with the sister he should have had in the first place.
Well, and remember, there have been some other opportunities for Rutledge with other women. And I'm drawing a blank on Mrs. And I
I
can't
don't remember
remember
either, but yes, he has had.
her name to save my life, but she appeared in several of the books. There have been a couple of possibilities and opportunities there. And my mother always used to say is you try to introduce your son to a nice young lady and ultimately wind up dealing with whoever he happens to bring home. So it's a question of finding the right fit, and we'll see. That's the fun thing about Rutledge that Caroline really instilled in me from the beginning, because I was more of an outline person. And this seat of the pants approach to writing was new to me. And yet, in the years leading up to the release of Bethesda Wills, we learned how to put it forward in a way where we don't really know. We don't really prejudge the book. When we start a book, we don't know who did it. And we don't necessarily know why. We find out as Rutledge finds out. Like we've both said many times that we're terrible when it comes to red herrings, because other authors do it and do it extremely well. And I'm not saying that our way is the way, but as the investigation progresses, Rutledge becomes interested in certain people and certain outcomes and follows those, and then they don't work out for one reason or another. And so it's not a question of burying clues and pointing things in a direction. It's more a question of letting Rutledge find out. And as he finds out, we find out. It's just sometimes it would be nicer if he would find out a little sooner, because when you get to 80,000+ words in a 90,000 word manuscript, it can be a little tense towards the end as we're trying to figure out where Rutledge is taking us. And yet I think that's what allows us to truly develop characters so that they have an opportunity to have a say-so. I think you remember the famous story. I think it was in, it was one of the earlier books where we had a character, he'd done everything we wanted him to do, and we killed him. And yet, from that point forward, the story really bogged down. We were having problems trying to figure out what was wrong. And we realized that we were writing these scenes and that character was missing. And we realized that that character hadn't said all that that character was going to say. So we ultimately went back and unkilled him and brought him back in, and he said his piece. Then we killed him anyway, but
Later, I know. Well, a book is an evolving thing until the moment you let it go and go off to your publisher. So, that's one of the things that readers don't really have a chance to see, is the evolutionary nature of the book and the way it ends up. But my thought about Kate, Charles, is that these other women, it would be a marriage à trois, because of Hamish. And it would be difficult. I've always thought that Rutledge didn't want to become that intimate with someone because of Hamish. But Kate, who's known him, forever, since before the war and all, he might be able to reveal to her, as he couldn't probably to other people.
And the progression of time as he's learning how to deal with his issues, he's more comfortable. But, we introduced Kate into the picture in No Shred of Evidence. So that's quite a few books that Kate has slowly grown into the picture. And I don't know. We'll have to
Well,
find out.
she was always there since she was the sister, and
Yes.
you can see how it goes. The other character that has been in many of the books and has given Rutledge a lot of professional grief, of course, is the evil inspector, or his evil boss at the yard, the jealous and difficult man. So I was happy to see, without giving anything away, that something good happens to Rutledge professionally in this book, which is a nice change. So I'm really glad you did that. So let's talk about Essex, because there was a very, very good book by Mike Ripley, who's been writing Marjorie Allingham's Mr. Campion a couple of years ago. And he too set it up there in the salt flats where, in the marshy part of Essex. And I have been in salt pans in Brittany, I've been in salt pans in Peru and all, but I never really thought about Essex as a source of salt, or how interesting that landscape would be. What drew you up to Essex for this book?
Well, first of all, you know how we like to wander.
Yes.
And sometimes in the trip a couple of years ago, when we were doing A Fatal Lie, we spent some time in northern Wales and rode in long boats and along the canals, and that's where that book came from. And we had an opportunity to go up and spend some time in Malden salt. Nowadays, in some of your finer Malden sea salt, in some of your finer gourmet stores, is still available and for purchase, and it's from Essex. And yet it's a really intriguing place because of the way the rivers come together, almost in a delta there going out. And we discovered the salt flats, and sure enough, it's like, this is interesting. What can we do with this?
Well, it's a different landscape, and the village, at least the Ripley book, described the villages as really quite spare. They were not particularly welcoming. They were not picturesque in the way that you think about the Cotswolds or somewhere like that. But you do have an estate there. And the other thing is that because of the location on the North Sea there, where Essex is, there were airfields there. And so you have
there was an airfield adjacent to Benton Abbey,
right,
that was used during the war. Now it's been closed down, and I say now, at the time the book takes place, the air base has been closed, but there was a close interaction between Lady Benton and the air base, because she would have the airmen and their crews come over and spend some time on the grounds, and took the time to get to know them. And so the country owed her a debt of gratitude, especially in the military, for all the work that she'd done supporting the Royal Air Corps base there. And it added an interesting dimension, because when Lady Benton first reports this murder, there were a lot of people who thought that between seeing these young men going off and fighting and dying, and being a widow and losing her son, that she finally had more than she could take. And so suddenly, when she calls up when she gets word to the local constable that she's seen a murder, and describes it, but they come out, there's no marks in the ground, there's no blood, there's no body, there's nothing to really see. And the person that she swears that she saw commit the murder, Captain Nelson, died during the war. According to all the military records, he died long before 1918, and it's now spring of 21. So how could a ghost come back and commit a murder, and there's no physical signs to support that anything actually took place? So a lot of it rests on her eyewitness testimony, so to speak. And as a result, when Rutledge is assigned the case, it's fodder for not only Markham, his boss, but all the people in his office. They're giving him a certain amount of abuse as he's headed out with his new assignment. But at the same time, Lady Benton is the type of person who has contacts and connections, and was able to reach out to the chief constable and have the yard called in to investigate, even though there's not much to go on. We're always looking for ways to give Rutledge a really difficult case, and sometimes we get partway through the book and start saying to ourselves, did we give him one too difficult to solve?
Well, that would fall on your shoulders. Indeed, that's true. So while Lady Benton may have connections that eventually result in a Scotland Yard inspector coming to investigate, she's very much discounted locally.
Yes.
And, you know, she's a widow, and I mean, and tragically, her son has been killed in the war, and she's trying to hold together Benton Abbey. For what purpose, Charles? What is it that because there is no heir, what is it that she's trying to hold together?
The tradition, the estate. In many ways, it is her foundation. And as a result, the survival and well-being of Benton Abbey is very important to her.
But she intends to donate it to something. I mean, I thought her end game was to keep it going as long as she could. And then the National Trust didn't exist, I don't think, in 1921, but she had some idea of donating it to the public in some fashion.
Yes, she did. And especially because a lot of the country homes in England were falling by the wayside. First of all, because so many of the men had gone off to war, and the country homes and estates were in a terrible state of disrepair.
Right.
And then because of the economic situation in England, you remember England not only lost an entire generation of young men, but they also lost 15% of their national wealth and were deeply in debt and trying to make up that debt. One of the ways they did it was through estate tax. And that's where it became well known for someone to have a title in name only, because with the estate taxes and the state of disrepair, a lot of the country homes and estates were being shut down completely.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to see that happen to Benton Abbey.
Well, I mean, it was, the labor shortage was acute. I mean, where you might have had 11 gardeners or something to look after some beautiful estate, you might then have like an old man and a boy or something. A lot of women who had been in service had to took jobs, Readers of Maisie Dobbs, for example, will know that, women drove ambulances. Bess Crawford serves as a nurse. So
Well,
there
they were
were,
driving trucks, delivering mail, working
Yeah.
in munitions factories.
exactly.
I think we've said this before that, we see Rosie the Riveter, the poster woman of World War II in the United States, but in England, it was most definitely in World War I that women were filling in the roles from the countryside to the cities
Yeah.
that were left vacant by the men gone off to war. And
Very
so
true.
many of them didn't return. And it really changed. The part that we find so fascinating with both of the series is what happened as a result of the war and what had changed so dramatically in England as a result with the manpower shortage, the financial shortages, the expansion of voting rights, not only to women, but to the entire population in general. We don't really delve into a lot of it in the stories we tell. We're more a witness to what's happening rather than delving into the root causes. But England was changing. The Victorian and Edwardian era was over.
Yeah.
You'd come through a war where all of the monarchies of Europe had fallen. And yet the monarchy in England was trying to stay alive and survive. It was a very difficult time for the king and queen at the time. George
And Mary.
V had gone through, we changed the name to Windsor as a result. What had happened to Wilhelm as a relative and to his close relative, Nicholas, in Russia, losing his life. There was a spread of communism when they had the first pretty much open elections in England. They weren't sure what the populace was going to decide. So there were a lot of things going on there that made life difficult, and people were having to make new decisions in a new time period.
Well, but that's why Lady Benton's interesting, because she's trying to hold the line to the way things were while things are changing. And of course, she's dealing, she saw something, but because there's no real physical evidence and all, it's hard for her to have anybody take her seriously. So Rutledge does have an interesting task in front of him, but you also bring Bess Crawford's into this book, not Bess herself, right? But her mother?
No, we bring Melinda Crawford in. Melinda Crawford is directly related to Bess, but
Okay.
she's not Bess's mother. Melinda has played a role in both series, but she's really been a source of strength for Rutledge. If you remember back when Rutledge was injured, he went and stayed with Melinda Crawford as he was recuperating and was
Right.
suspended from the yard from the investigation that was going on. Melinda's done a lot for Rutledge in his career. She's come and visited him in several of the books. So yes, she's playing a role again.
She does. Well, what relationship is she to Bess? Is she her aunt? Is she a cousin?
Yes.
She's her aunt?
Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't remember
And she
Bess's
was
mother's name, to be honest.
she was a close family friend of Rutledge's parents.
Okay. So I thought that was nice. That was kind of a nice bridge, because Rutledge spends some time with Melinda in this book, and when he needs a break or when he needs some direction and so forth. Because, you know, here is this impossible case. He knows that Markham is always out to get him. He doesn't know whether his career at the art is going to survive. You know, he has an awful lot going on in this book to worry him. And, you know, as a reader, you can't figure out, well, neither apparently could Charles and Caroline until they got to the end of writing it. You can't quite work out how this is ever going to get resolved. But I did, you know, I did like the depiction of the airfield because, you know, we think of airfields as, you know, like LAX or something, you know, with
Yes.
concrete runways and building and all the rest of it. But, you know, these wartime airfields, especially in the First World War, where, you know, barely even had any sort of Air Force going on, were basically just big grass fields, right? You know, they just mowed them close and, you know, that was it.
If you remember, Caroline and I flew in a 1920 Great Lakes biplane in Muncie, Indiana. If you go to the website, there's a little link you can click on that tells about our experience flying in that airplane. It was a two-seater and the instructor sat in the back. He couldn't take passengers because the FAA considers that in airlines. So, but he could take up students. So I went up, Caroline went up, and Deanna went up and took an introductory flying lesson.
Fun.
And I'm here to tell you, when you're in a canvas and wood airplane in November in Muncie, Indiana, on a cloudy kind of spitting rain kind of day, you get a whole new appreciation, especially when you're flying at 3,000 to 5,000 feet doing 80 miles an hour and there's no parachute.
Well, but those conditions would have been perfectly normal for anybody flying in England much of the time.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, been cold,
That's-
rain, especially in
It was-
Essex, which is on the North Sea. I mean, Essex does not have a warm,
No.
sunny climate. It's
It's
not Kent.
definitely affected by weather on the channel, and it's not quite as far north as some of the other places that we've set books and have visited, but it's definitely not the world's prettiest weather to be flying in. And so it was a good experience. Caroline absolutely loved every minute of it.
Of course she did. She loved everything. You know, that was, I mean, she was a person who really enjoyed life and was always eager for new experiences, you know. And I mean, I often talked to her, or we emailed when, you know, we didn't see each other, and she always had something on the go. You know, she was
Yes.
always reading a great book or planning a new trip or, you know, deep into writing your manuscripts or whatever. So it was always energizing to
And
talk
she's
to her.
been to 105 different countries.
Right. No, I knew she had a remarkable travel backlog, but I think she liked her
One
trips to
time
England would be the best.
I asked Caroline, I said, I understand you like to go see all these different places, but why in the world did you go to Rwanda? And she looked at me and she said, oh, the silverback gorillas are in Rwanda. I said, well, in that case, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, she was really something. And in fact, Patrick, why don't we see if we have any comments or questions or memories of Caroline from people who might be watching?
Okay, let's see here. Well, Cheryl's somebody who's tuning in on YouTube, and you know, she is just expressing her condolences. And
Thank you.
yeah, Kathleen Stewart says, I appreciate the kindness and humanity in Rutledge. Let me see if there are any actual questions. Yeah, I always liked, it's funny, just me personally, I always liked talking with your mom when she was here. We always had great time. You know, I was really interested in you mentioned Wilfred Owen earlier. I've been fascinated by that whole, you know, generation of World War I poets. And she was really, obviously, I'm sure you both are very familiar with all of them. And, I remember talking a lot about, just the classics of World War I literature, by, Sassoon and Graves and all those great texts. And I remember also very clearly when that movie came out a few years ago, the Peter Jackson World War I.
They shall not grow old.
Yes, I remember having a really nice conversation with both of you about that. And
That was a wonderful film. So was 1917.
yes.
But Caroline's father and mother loved poetry, especially her mother. Sidney Lanier was my grandmother's favorite poet. And we had an opportunity one time, we went to give a talk in Macon, Georgia. And the talk was held in Sidney Lanier's former home. And Caroline was on cloud nine. That was definitely a high point in her life, to get to sit in a chair and talk about writing. It's also one of the reasons why we had so much fun with Wings of Fire, which was the second book that came out with the poetry of O.A. Manning.
Yeah.
Rutledge carried in the pocket of his tunic, he carried a collection of O.A. Manning's poems, and in Wings of Fire, he found out that O.A. was actually Olivia, that it was written by a woman, and it's set in Cornwall, and it's through her poetry that he's able to go down the right paths to solve the crime. And as we were writing it, we suddenly realized that if we were going to do it, we had to write some poetry. And so we wrote the poetry and enjoyed doing it so much. We've kept that throughout the entire Rutledge series. There are always a little snippet of O.A. Manning poetry in several of the books throughout the series. The funny thing is that we've been contacted by several people, one in particular who was at the University of Edinburgh writing his doctoral thesis, and he wanted to do it on the poems of O.A. Manning, and wrote to us to ask us where he could get a copy of the complete works of O.A. Manning. And we had to write it back and tell him that there are no complete works of O.A. Manning, because we wrote the poetry and O.A. Manning never actually was a poet, which I think he found a little distressing.
Oh.
That
So Charles, I'm sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, didn't Wilfred Owen, who's probably the best known of the World War I poets?
Yes, he was.
He did not survive the war, is that right? Was he killed in World War I?
I believe you're correct.
I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah.
We do have some questions. Actually, this is great. My aunt, Anne, is tuning in. Wow, a family member's tuning in. That's great. She, along with some other people that are watching, let's see, are just wondering about your plans going forward. Are you going to be continuing both the Rutledge and Crawford series yourself?
My first priority was to make sure that A Game of Fear came out on time and in as pristine a condition as possible. I wanted to make sure that all of us and all of the people at HarperCollins Morrow agreed with me that we wanted to make this book as clean and as perfect as we possibly could. And now I'm knee deep in the middle of working on the edits for the next best book, which we turned in July of last year. And I'm hoping that it will be out in print in sometime this year, if not early next year. Once I complete that process, then I'm going to turn my attention to seeing what I could do about the 25th in the Rutledge series. My primary concern is we have developed a lot of wonderful fans who have supported Rutledge and enjoyed Rutledge and really set a standard for ourselves in the process. If I complete a Rutledge, I'm going to send it to our agent, Lisa Gallagher, and have her take a look at it and then send it on to HarperCollins. If all three of us feel that it lives up to the standard that I think we've set, then yes, it will come out. If not, no. I would rather not do it than do it poorly.
Well, Rutledge's story is not done, neither is Bess's. So,
No,
it's, if you can do it, if you feel like the quality is there, it really seems a shame for fans who've invested all these years, since 1996, in fact.
I
Reading them
agree
not to have that. But,
I
it's not.
agree. I have been working a great deal on what we're calling right now Rut 25. I have a basic premise. I've done a tremendous amount of research and pulled it together to be able to start writing that book. And I plan to do it and give it 100%. But at the same time,
I know.
I want the feedback from our agent, our editors, might call on one or two special people that I trust. Hint.
Of course.
But as I said, I don't want to turn in something, no matter what I do, if the next Rutledge that would be my own writing without Caroline is naturally going to get compared to everything that went before. And it, by its very nature, will be missing Caroline's input and help with the book. So that's a given before anything else. So I definitely want to make sure that that standard that we set is maintained. And that's the only caveat. I would love to sit here and say, oh, sure, got it in the bag, it'll be, but I want to make sure that it is done and done right.
I think that's a very worthy goal.
Yeah, there's an interesting question coming in from Facebook. I think it's Tammy, says, will Rutledge ever have a mystery or a time when he will visit his godfather?
Well, actually, his godfather has been in several of the books, not a lot. It's definitely a possibility. Scotland's an interesting area to do. We did that with Legacy to the Dead, which was one of the early books that we did. But it would be something, it would be a lot of fun to get back to.
Let's see. Christy wants to know, she says, in addition to visiting places in England, what other ways do or did both of you do research, archives, etc.?
Well, we went to a lot of museums and a lot of archives. The Imperial War Museum is great. One of our trips we had before the COVID situation came up, Deanna and I had an opportunity to spend an entire day going through the Churchill War rooms, which was something that I had always wanted to do. I've always been an avid fan of Churchill and all of his various works. I even have his 2 fiction books that he wrote. The point where we gain the most is actually talking with people. And the British are not easy to talk to. There are 2 basic ways that we found that work best. One, they're happy to talk about their dog. Deanna and I have a Westie, so we're always talking to people about their dogs, and that leads into other things. Another place that we enjoy is going to the markets. They're still, even for example, when we were in Stratford, they have a big market in the center of town. We went to one in York as well, where various people bring in a wide variety of wares to bring in and show. And we loved going in. Caroline and I would kind of split up when we went to a location. We covered more ground and she followed her interests and I followed mine. But you would stop at, well, I was in one market and they had beautiful loaves of bread, kind of unusual. And I was talking to the people in that booth, so to speak, or tent, and they were telling me about the different types of loaves and why this was called a farmhouse loaf, and it's got its unique shape. And that leads into conversations that take you back to them talking about their fathers and grandfathers and the stories that they heard, not so much about what they did in the war, but how stories like, we were always told to be quiet when we were in his house, not to make any loud or sudden noises, or yes, well, my grandfather spent most of his time in a darkened room. He didn't like to come out very much and socialize. These are the kinds of things that you gain a whole new perspective on and really make the difference. If you want to know a location, you can understand the geography and what the weather's like, these kinds of things, and the history of the place. But if you really want to get for a feeling, as Barbara was saying earlier, the people in Essex are unique into themselves, just as they are Cornwall or Northern Wales or wherever. They had their own unique take on it. A Fatal Lie was a lot of fun because we were dealing with the whole community, the semi-transient community of the people who ran the narrow boats that traveled the various canals. And by talking with the people and spending some time around them, or just sitting quietly in a pub somewhere, minding your own business, but keeping your ears open, you get a real sense of the people that populate the place. And that's where a lot of our characters come from. I think if most authors were honest, they would tell you that they're people watchers. And we love to do that.
The BBC has a vast archive of oral histories from World War I veterans, don't they?
Yes, they do. The BBC and the Imperial War Museum have quite a bit of oral histories as well as written histories that are available to go through and look at. The problem is when you've got a large archive on that, how do you narrow it down? How do you find those unique stories that stand out? And is that story germane to the particular story that you're trying to tell in this particular book. And so that's where going around and talking to people makes such a big difference. I remember one time we were at the Tucson Book Festival, and I'll never forget, a gentleman came up to me. He was an older gentleman, and he stuck out his hand, and I shook his hand, and he grasped my hand for a minute, and he said, "Thank you for Hamish." And I just, "Oh, you're more than welcome." And he was still holding my hand. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "No, you don't understand. Thank you for Hamish." And then he let go of my hand and turned and walked away. And that's when you know that you've done something right.
Well, Patrick, anything else?
That sounds like a pretty good note to end on.
Well, it does. So let me say that A Game of Fear is one of these, in its way, it's an impossible crime. You know, people used to love in the golden age setting up mysteries. Locker room mysteries are impossible crimes. And but the circumstances, here's Lady Benton on her estate, you know, seeing what she believes is a murder, seeing that the murderer is somebody already dead. Nobody wants to listen to her. There's no physical evidence. So here comes Rutledge, you know, because he has been assigned to it. Is it an impossible crime, as Charles says, you know? Will Charles and Carolyn, will they actually be able to solve it for the satisfaction of the reader? You know, it would be a terrible thing to write like 95,000 words and then suddenly realize that you can't end it. I mean, how awful. So
that can be a real problem. Fortunately, it hasn't happened yet, but it's there.
So there is actually a solution. It may not be, you know, the crime or the solution that you're expecting, but it definitely is a solution. It's a really interesting book. And I love the way that all of the Rutledges really immerse you in a particular place, which is, as Charles has said, is mostly accomplished by having gone there and being immersed in the place themselves. It's a wonderful way to tour a country in its past, but being England, a lot of its past is still present. So
yes, it is.
Yep. So a lot of places like these Essex villages haven't really changed all that much. And a lot of the estates that couldn't be maintained were lost, but there are many of them that have been saved by the National Trust, or they've been turned into hotels, or they've been open to the public. And so there is a way that many of the great estates have survived. I have been to an inordinate number of them in every cathedral in England, I would like to say. It's just my own little thing. I took a long sabbatical in the mid of my life, and all by myself spent several months in England doing all the things that a dedicated reader in England might do. It was wonderful. Anyway,
it's funny you mentioned that about country homes being turned into hotels. We stayed in one in East Anglia, and I'll never forget it because it was called the Severed Hand, and their letterhead was a hand right in the top center.
Well, you know, it's like pub signs, Charles. Some of them are really pretty grotesque if you think about it.
Did you learn the story behind that, Charles?
Must be.
Yeah,
probably was a crusader, hun, that, you know, when, I mean, that's the sort of thing when people hacked off things with swords and then carried on. Anyway, it was a real delight to talk to you. We do still have autographed copies of A Game of Fear signed by Charles. And if the best gets whipped into shape and it publishes, whenever it publishes, we will be back to talk to Charles about it. Because I love the Best Crawford series as well. And she is emerging from the war in a different way than Rutledge.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. She probably in many ways has more of a story to develop than Rutledge, if you really think about it.
Things have changed, especially after an Irish hostage. Yeah. And her life is starting to take a new direction, as it naturally would. now that the war is over. So there's quite a bit of opportunity for things to progress. And that's why I'm really excited about this next best. And I'm hoping that we've been moving along at a very good pace. Naturally, with Caroline passing so suddenly, it was a lot to pick up all at once. But we've gotten Game of Fear out, and I feel confident that the next best will be out soon, and you'll be one of the first to know.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that because I am such a fan of it. It's really been lovely to visit with you face to face, Charles. And for those of you watching, if you knew Carolyn, it'd be, drop us a note and we'll forward it to Charles if you have a memory or something that you would like to share. Be lovely. Anyway, thank you for a very nice evening. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you, Patrick, for putting all those pictures together.
You bet. Anytime.
Indeed. Patrick,
And I love that
we couldn't do
bookcase.
any of these without Patrick, who generally, we've had a real learning curve, haven't we, Patrick? You more than me, because you've had to learn the tech part of it. I just talk.
Well, I mean, considering I'm the store Luddite, yes, I would say so. I've learned a lot.
Actually, the two of us are the two people on the staff who probably, with one exception, have the fewest
skills,
fewest
yeah.
IT skills. I know, but we've been thrust into this role. It's really kind of funny.
Necessity is the mother of et cetera. Yep.
It really
Yes,
is.
absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure as always, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, Charles. Maybe you'll be able to actually come and see us with Bess. That would be
That would be
exciting.
great.
It would be.